Now, how to fuel growth in developed economies without resorting to credit and debt? That's the big question occupying our guest tonight. Lord Adair Turner has had a long business career and was Director General of Britain's peak business body, the CBI. Just as the GFC broke in 2008, he took on the chairmanship of the Financial Services Authority and later helped redesign global banking and shadow banking regulation with the International Financial Stability Board. He's a senior fellow of the Institute of New Economic Thinking, founded in 2009 by George Soros, and he joins me now from London. Lord Turner, welcome to the programme.
Hello, nice to talk to you.
Now, you've done a lot of work, sir, on the reform of the financial system, but there are more fundamental problems you talk about now. If unchecked, what does a modern economy look like?
Well, I think that it's important for us to step back from the details of the global financial crisis and to look at the long-term picture. And the long-term picture is that if you look at all the advanced economies together, back in 1950, they had private sector debt of about 50% of GDP, of national income. And that just rose and rose and rose, and then it accelerated at an even faster pace, and it reached about 170, 180% of GDP, private sector debt, so that's households and corporates together, had reached that by 2008. And I think it is that growth of leverage which was the fundamental reason, the really deep reason why we had the financial crisis, but also crucially why the post-crisis recovery has been so difficult, because we have an enormous debt overhang problem. Now, the reason why leverage increased, mathematically it's obvious, is that private credit keeps on growing faster than national income, the nominal GDP. If you were trying to sum it up for the advanced economies in general for 15 or 20 years before the crisis, if nominal GDP grew at 5% or so per annum, private credit, grew at 10 or 15% per annum. Now, that is, in the long run, unstable. And I think we have to ask some searching questions about why is it that we seem to need that growth of credit in order to grow our economies, because if we do really need it, then we have a fundamental problem of instability.
One of the other trends that is occurring is this growing inequality, and it seems to be partly globalisation, partly this dreadful word financialisation of economies, but also, to my surprise, you talk about technological change contributing to it. How?
Well, if you step back to the fundamental issue of why do we have such credit-intensive economies, I think there are three main factors. One is the extraordinary extent to which banking systems throughout the world do not lend money in a way that stimulates the economy, but lend money essentially to buy existing real estate. That's one issue, and we might come back to that. The second, I think, is inequality. I think as you get rising inequality, you have richer people fundamentally save a hell of a lot of their money. They don't tend to spend as much as poorer people. So the system only reaches a balance if richer people are saving, accumulating money balances in banks and other financial instruments, and it's being lent to, well, I say poorer people, but also middle income people. So I think the rise in inequality is also part of the story of why we have this unstable increase in debt. Now, why is the rise of inequality occurring? There is a part of the story which is financialization, but I think technology is part of it. There is something about the latest form of technology, information and communication technology, which gives enormous economic power, economic return to the person who is clever enough to create Microsoft Word or Facebook or Google or Amazon. The returns that those people have made are absolutely enormous, and simultaneously right at the other end of the income distribution, it tends to wipe out jobs and automate jobs. I don't think we can assume that all forms of technology change are equal in their impact on the distribution of income. I think it may be that the particular technology wave we had in the middle of the 20th century, which was electromechanical technology, happened to be more conducive to a somewhat more equal distribution than this latest wave. So I think there is a technological element to it.
So the free marketeers would still always argue that growth is going to deal with inequality because the rising tide lifts all boats. Why is growth not the answer? And I suppose we could bring in here Thomas Piketty and his ideas about wealth.
Well, Piketty argues that we are in an environment where the wealth-to-income ratio, the relationship between wealth and income, keeps rising. I think one of the crucial things to realise in Piketty's figures, and I don't personally think he's focused enough on it himself, but it is absolutely clear from his figures, that by far the biggest increase of that wealth-to-income ratio is explained by housing. And one of the phenomena we have, which is quite extraordinary throughout the world, is that the value of desirable land and desirable housing in the cities where people want to live, whether it be London or Paris or Sydney or Melbourne, keeps on rising on a long term relative to income. And I think that is probably is inherent. It's probably just the nature of how we want to spend our money as we get richer, but it makes the economy less stable. And going back to your question about can we simply grow out of the inequality problem, I think the difficulty is that a more unequal society is probably a more credit-intensive economy, and a more credit-intensive economy is a more unstable economy. So I think there are fundamental issues about the focus of the banking system and of modern societies on real estate wealth and rising inequality, which are important to how do we make sure we have a more stable financial system that doesn't do a repeat of the GFC.
And this all in the context of falling interest rates.
Yes, I think the interesting thing about why our interest rates, we know why interest rates are so low after the GFC. It's because we've been desperately trying to stimulate the economies in the face of a very big debt overhang. The really interesting question is, why did real interest rates, say 10-year risk-free interest rates, fall from 3.5% in the late 80s to 1.3% even before the crisis? I think that may have to do with the fact that actually many capital goods, not so much in the sort of areas of the economy where Australia focuses, like mining, but for instance, many capital goods in the information and communications technology arena are very cheap. It simply doesn't take much investment to build a Facebook which is worth 150 billion of equity value. And that means that there isn't a demand for investment funds, and that means that the interest rate collapses, and then we all borrow money to invest in real estate.
Now, Lord Turner, some of your solutions include a higher minimum wage, policies on supply of real estate, including tax, and macroprudential tools. How many of them are acceptable in this day and age?
Well, I think when you're trying to understand the fundamental drivers of where we are economically, it's important to set out the direction that we should head in, even if you're not convinced one's going to be able to get that applied. But I do think that certainly on the macroprudential side, I think we will increasingly see central banks as macroprudential regulators throughout the world having to not only use interest rates, but use quantitative tools such as loan-to-value limits on mortgages, loan-to-income ratio limits, increases in capital requirements. Because I think when we get these real estate booms going, and they are extremely destructive in terms of the financial instability effects, you cannot slow them down by simply pulling the interest rate. If you try and slow them down by pulling the interest rate, you will really make a mess of the sort of non-real estate area of your economy long before you slow down the real estate boom. I think we have to use macroprudential tools to slow down real estate booms.
Lord Turner, I wish we had 70 minutes, not 7, but I thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.